Hi guys, welcome to this week's lockdown lesson. Again, we've got a 2-in-1 lesson and we are going to look at 16th notes in syncopation. And then in the second half of the lesson, we are actually going to do one big summary that summarizes the lessons that we've had in this series previously. So quarter note syncopation, 8th note syncopation, and the 16th note syncopation. Now, before I go on and talk about today's lesson, if you're unfamiliar with the 16th note splits, now this was a previous lesson in the lockdown series that I specifically went through the 16th note variations in really great detail. So if you haven't done it, I recommend you go and find that lesson in the series and complete that first. In today's lesson, I am going to revise this a little bit, but not in as much detail as I did on that particular lesson for you. Now, I'll put up the PDF and you'll see 16th notes. As I've said in the 16th note split lessons, we count 16th notes 1 eander, 2 eander, 3 eander, 4 eander. At school, you may have been taught tigger, 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 tigger. When you get older, you learn the way that's most commonly counted, and that is the 1 eander, 2 eander, 3 eander, 4 eander way. So that's how we're going to be looking at them. Now, on the first line, you can see all 16th notes are grouped in groups of 4. And there is no rests or anything in that first line. It's literally 2 bars of solid 16th notes. Now we're going to continue our method of playing syncopation by playing single strokes the whole way through. The first line's really easy. Let's get that out of the way and then we'll get straight into the second line and talk about how we're going to approach it. Okay, here's the first line. Okay, there's the first line, which is 2 bars, and you can see I'm miming through counting it out loud there. The audio of my voice is not coming out when I do that because only the drums come out, but I am actually counting that out loud, which I want you to do as well when you're doing it. Now, when we go to the second line, the format we're going to take on this approach in going through this method is the same as the others. So basically the first time you play it through when there's no rests, and then the next line down we're taking the last note off of the grouping and we're resting that, and then the next line down we're taking the next note backwards and we're going to rest that, and then we continue doing that until we get to the front of the grouping and we take the first note off as a rest. So we're only taking 1 note off as a rest each time, but they're just in different spots. So if I count the 1 E and A out to you, the first line, we're not taking any rests, right? If I went 1 E and A, the second line, we're literally just resting that one. So you still play a fresh air shot, but you just rest it. Rest that one. Don't play the actual drum, right? You play in the air if you want. So we'll go 1 E and A. All right, that's pretty simple. That's the line we're going to do next. Let's do it. Don't forget we're alternating our single strokes, and we'll just do a fresh air shot for the last 16th note in that grouping, like this. Pretty simple. All right. For those of you that are pretty good at the 16th note split lesson, you'll be finding this pretty easy. The third line, If we've got our 1E and that was rested the previous line. So we're going to rest this one. 1E and. So down she goes. 1E and All right? 1E and Let's try it. Third line. When you start playing it and you're learning it for the first time, keep going as long as you want to until it starts to feel and sound good. All right? So there's two things. You take it slow as you need to be able to complete the task, and you just keep playing it on repeat until it starts to feel good and you're happy with it. All right? Okay, so let's go line 4. We've got our 16th note grouping, 1E and In line 4, we're missing this one, 1E. Okay, so down she goes, 1E and 1 and All right, so let's see how this sounds on the drums. Here we go. There you go. Well done. It's pretty easy. All right. Now we're up to the 5th line. You can tell at the start of this line and start of every bar there, we've got a rest at the start. Okay, so 1E and it must be this one. 1. Down she goes. 1E and 1E and Pretty simple to understand. Let's do it on the drums with fresh air on the first one, and then, you know, the single strokes all the way through all the others. 1. Okay, that was good. Now that's our 4 lines. Now, I would like to play it a bit faster for you. But before I do that, I want to explain a little bit about the theory behind how you write the notes and how to identify the notes. Now, I've done this before in the lessons, but it's always good to rehash the information to help, you know, you guys remember and understand. You know, the more you hear it, the more you're familiar with it, starts to make sense maybe, you know? Like maybe the first couple of times we talk about it, it doesn't quite make sense. You sort of get a handle on it, but then, you know, after you've heard the explanation a few times, it starts to be understood better. So let's go and think about this description of how we identify and count and do a bit of theory. Okay, obviously the first line, no rests or anything, but what you do notice is that all the notes are joined by 2 lines at the very top. So there's your note, there's your 2 lines across the top of the notes. Okay, so that's how you identify 16th notes, and that's how you identify how to count it. Once you know it's 16th notes, you know it's 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. Simple, right? Let's go to the second line. You can see there that the first 2 notes have got the 2 lines on the top, but the third note has only got 1 line across the top. Okay, so what was 1 line across the top? Who got that right? I don't know, because unfortunately we haven't got in-person lessons, so I can't communicate with you. But I reckon some of you did get it right. It's eighth notes. Okay? So eighth notes are counted 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So this is where it gets a bit tricky. You only start counting the eighth note when you see, and it's the time to play the eighth note, okay? So before that, we're actually playing sixteenths and counting sixteenths. So the first two notes are sixteenths and the third one is 8. So you could go 1 E and that's it. You leave the out at the end, remember? 1 E and. You don't have to say the but that's a good way of sort of remembering you have to wait that extra one. But because that last note, the third note in that little grouping, is actually written as an eighth note, you already know it goes for a whole eighth note, which means if it starts on the end, it finishes on the 2, because that's how you count eighth notes, isn't it? 1 and 2. And it was the and off beat 1, wasn't it? 1 E and. So the next note in the sequence that it gets across to must be on beat 2, because that's how you count eighth notes. 1 and 2. I hope that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense to you, rewind and go through the explanation again with me. All right? Very important that you just start becoming a bit more familiar with how that's written and the length of time it goes. So it's really what the only difference between all these notes is the length of time they go for, right? So how long the note goes for. So if I counted these notes as 16th notes first, for example, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. But if I did it as eighth notes, it'd be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 16th notes, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 and eighth note. 16th, 8. So you could tell some of them are faster, shorter, some of them are longer, and that's where you get your rhythms from. All right, so that's the second line. Okay, so you can tell the third line is a bit trickier. Now this is where it's going to be a little tough to explain, but I'm going to do my best with my 4-finger explanation. All right, so the first note, it's got 2 lines across the top. The second note has got 1 line across the top, and the third note you see has got 2 lines across the top. So let's just have a look at that grouping. Obviously the first note, it's got 2 lines across the top, it's a 16th. So you count, there's your first note, you count a 16th note across to the next note that you see, because this one is a 16th note, it's got the 2 lines across. So that would go 1 E. This note would have to be on E because of the fact that this one is a 16th, right? So it's counted 1 E. There's E. Good. All right, now E, that's only got 1 line across the top. It's only got 1 line across the top. So that means you have to have an eighth note space between E and the next note. All right. Now this is where it's tricky, because eighth notes are usually counted 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. But if you start the eighth note on an E, that would mean it has to go to the A. It has to skip across this one and go to that one. Right? There's your eighth note space. E, A. Okay. So it'll go from the start, goes 1 E, A. Skip the end. 1 E and A. All right. So hopefully that sort of makes sense. But let's just quickly look at what you would normally count eighth notes as. 1 and. It's hard to get all those figures in the right spot. That looks like a rock and roll sign. So 1 is not there. 1, quiet, and then the is at the end, right? So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay? But if I actually started the eighth note here on the E, there it is, I'd have to make sure to get the up in the air as well, because that's going to be where it finishes. E, 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 Otherwise, it'd be E and, which is actually a 16th note space. It can't just go E and, it has to go across to All right. I hope that explained it. It's a really, really tricky one. But essentially, if you start your eighth note on 1, then it has to go to the and. 1 and 2 and. But if I started on the E, it has to go to the E, E, All right. That's the hardest thing you'll learn in today's lesson. All right. It's a little tricky, but it's just the space that you need to leave for an eighth note. It has to be an eighth note length. It doesn't matter if you started on the 1 or the E. It still has to go for an eighth note in length. So that's how it goes, all right? So when we look at that bar, we've got a note on 1, we've got a note on E, and then our last note is on because of that eighth note, second note there. So it will go like this. If I had the 4 notes up, it would go 1 E Get that one down. 1 E and That's what it is. But that's the theory behind it, all right? Again, it's quite a lot of information, and hopefully my 4-finger salute helped you guys. Let me know if it did or it didn't. I might have to do another exercise on that at some point. Let's run down to the next line, line 4. Okay, we have first note is an eighth note because it's got one line across the top. So that means because it's on beat 1 to begin with, it has to count 1 and. All right, so the next note you see has got to be on and. So 1, if we had the 4-finger 16th note, it'd be, that's going to go down because that'd be 1 E and This is an eighth note, so it's got to go 1 and. Right? 1 and. So on and, it's actually a 16th note on and, on that second note. That's actually a 16th with 2 lines across the top if you have a look. This is the weirdest lesson ever with this 4-finger thing, but it's, I reckon it's working. All right, so that means that because that's a 16th note, you have to count and because that's what the sequence of 16th note counting is. 1 E and So if it starts on and, the next sequence step in a 16th note count is all right? So the whole thing together would be 1 E and and that's how we work it out. 1, you play 1, you leave the E, then you play and All right, now the last exercise is actually pretty easy to explain. You see a funny looking squiggle there at the start? That's a 16th note rest. It's like a funny 7 with an extra little tail or dot thingy in the middle, right? Just like how 16th notes are written with 2 lines across the top of their note, the rests are written with sort of like a funny 7 with 2 sort of lines across it. In a funny way, it's always relating to that sort of thing with notes, 2 lines across the top, 2 lines across the rest. Okay? So that's pretty easy. So we know we have to just rest a 16th note. So when that's on beat 1, you just rest that one. And you play the rest. So 1 is rested. So 1 E and You play the E and 1 E and Easy. 1. All right. There are our 5 lines. There's a little bit of theory now with those 5 lines. If you get confused, I don't blame you. It can be pretty tricky. But go back and listen to that whole explanation again. And hopefully, if you've listened 2 or 3 times, it starts to make sense. Go slowly with my explanation. Try to just pause the recording and go over what I said and make sure you understand it if you get confused. All right? Okay, let's do these a bit faster. I'll put bass drum and hi-hat on the quarter note sections, so everything 1, 2, 3, 4 will be played with my bass drum and hi-hat, and I'll play the hands throughout it as I just did before, except instead of playing 2 bars like I did before, I'll play 4 bars each time. Okay, so line number 1. All right, line 2. Pretty cool. Line 3. That's a bit of a tricky feel, that one, isn't it? All right, line 4. Sounded like a bit of a gallop. That was good. And line 5 with 1 note at the beginning each time rested. That one's a bit tricky to keep your balance as far as the balance of the note separation and it sounding quite even. That's a bit tricky, but it's a great one, isn't it? I like that one. Okay, so there we have the 5 lines played slowly, explained a little bit of theory, and then played a little bit quicker with bass drum and hi-hat. We are now up to the summary section. So basically in this 8-bar summary, it's literally just playing some random concepts from what we've just learned. It's just the same stuff, but I'm just putting it randomly throughout and mixing it up a bit. And that's what syncopation's all about, as I explained in the previous syncopation lessons. That's what it means. So let's go through this. We'll go through it nice and slow, and let's see if we can follow it first. Maybe I'll play it slow, you watch it and understand how to read the notes a bit, and then we'll play it a bit quicker. All right, nice and slow. Here we go. That was good. Pretty tricky when you haven't seen it before. I've written that, but I literally just wrote it not thinking about much. I just sort of did it on the computer and it came out, and so that was my first time playing it. So I'm sight reading it through, and it can be difficult when you haven't seen it before. So now what we're going to do is play it with the bass drum and hi-hat, and I'm just going to play it a bit faster. Let's do this. Cool. There it was. So I played it a bit faster, and all of a sudden it changes the concept. It feels more fun. It also feels like, okay, I could use this in an environment, in a band, playing it over a fill somewhere around the drum kit, right? That's the whole point of it. You could use it as a bit of a solo even. Don't forget, always think about how you could utilize that around the drum kit, not necessarily just as something's written. You've got to start thinking outside the box a bit. You think I should play it a bit faster? It's pretty tricky because this, when I play, the drum is sort of vibrating and the iPad's vibrating because I've got it there, and the notes are small and I'm making up all these excuses. But it's tricky to read. Let's see if I could just increase that a little bit so I could see it a bit better. Let's try it a little bit faster. Did it. All right, challenge accepted and completed. All right, well done, guys. That actually ends our first half of the 2-lesson video. So there's a lot there to think about. I want you to pause it here and just make sure you understand and go through all the exercises thoroughly. You've got quite a bit of time. We've got holidays coming up, and you really want to make sure you take advantage of that. It'd be great for you guys to come back at school and, you know, be just that little bit better on the drum kit, you know, and know that you've really utilized your time well, even if it's just your understanding of notes. You know, you don't have to be necessarily a lot better over the drum kit in a technical way. Just even if you were better at understanding notes is a good achievement. So take your time with this one. Go over the other lessons if necessary. Get a good understanding, and then come back and see me here for the next lesson. All right. See you soon.